Welcome, everyone, to the Gridiron Review Senior Bowl podcast episode. I'm Zach, that's Jack, and we're happy to have you all here and are excited to be a part of your NFL offseason coverage. For me, it feels amazing to be in the middle of the offseason again, with trade rumors, coaching carousels completely done, and free agency speculation is starting to begin. What maybe the biggest of all is draft coverage. And this past weekend was what many consider to be the first big event of the NFL draft season with the Reese's Senior Bowl, a game in which 30% of all current football players have competed in. So there's a lot of prospects to keep an eye on, and it's just a fun time. And I need to specify that for this episode is only a recap of the game with some influence on the practice reports, as we have just now begun watching player film from their college seasons, and we'll have a better sense of their standing, draft prediction, and player profiling as our offseason progresses. With that being said, I'm going to start this episode with some quick notes on a few defensive players that I thought stood out from the rest. First being Jalen Petre, I believe it is, the safety from Baylor. He had a few big hits in the game that stood out, but also just smart play. He blew up a screen, which for a safety that is undersized is huge, because he's showing, to me at least, that despite the size, he might have a box safety role. But for me, without, again, watching the film, it seems like he's got prototypical slot cornerback size. Now, whether he can actually stick in coverage is something we have to find out, but he did stand out, and, that's what matters in these games. The second is Perion Winfrey from Oklahoma. He was named the MVP of the game with 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss. And it just seems like he got in so quickly on multiple plays, including a red zone rush where it was a quick handoff and he was already on him. It feels like he's one of the bigger risers, as his name was not, buried in practice, but he also wasn't talked about as like, oh, this guy's winning the week. But after the game, obviously as the MVP, it seems like he's got a big rise coming, or at least a decent sized rise, especially at the tackle, which I believe he is. If he can generate pressure, maybe the tape shows that there's a lot of potential there. And then the last one is Boye Mafe, I believe is how it's said, from Minnesota. He's listed as an edge. He's got the size, I think, to be an end, but he also seems quick enough to be a linebacker, so it kind of depends on where he's drafted. He also had 2 sacks and 3 tackles for a loss, but the difference being that he forced a fumble on his one strip sack of, I believe it was Sam Howell, where the hit seemed textbook. Not only did he get the strip sack, but he still hit Howell. Some guys you watch in the NFL go right for the ball and miss the sack, but either way, it was going to be a sack. And the fact that he got his arms around from the blind side, I believe it was, and was able to punch the ball out is a nice little thing to see from a guy that, could be day 2, specifically second round. Again, we have a lot of work to do, but he looked like he had a lot of potential. He was in there a lot. He terrorized Hal from what I could see, and he had a very quick step, it looked like. As the last note I have on Mafe is I read a report that he had been training with Aiden Hutchinson. Obviously, Hutchinson's also a prospect. He might be the number 1 pick, or at least the number 2. But the fact that Mafe is already training with others and learning stuff from players that are probably better than him is a great first step. Jack, you want to take over this defensive coverage?
Definitely. I had a couple notes for players that were kind of all over the field in each level. Just starting at the defensive line, the 2 that really caught my attention inside were Perion Winfrey and Travis Jones out of UConn. I'm really not going to go into Winfrey. Zach covered him. MVP, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Never really heard his name until this week. On that assumption, and I could be wrong, it seemed like he was probably going to be an early mid day 3 guy after going out and competing with these guys in the Senior Bowl, which obviously you see a lot more of the bigger schools there. I think that he could have worked himself into a mid-late day 2 pick. It'll be interesting to see how he tests at pro days and combines and stuff like that. Travis Jones out of UConn seemed like a pretty balanced type of defensive tackle, real good against the run, and seemed to generate pressure in the pass. It just seemed like he might not have been getting there every play, but it seemed like he was pushing his guy back on almost every snap. There was a couple where he got blown off, but I mean, when you come from a small school like UConn, you're not going to win every rep typically. Moving to the outsides, one of the ends I took note on was Myjai Sanders out of Cincinnati. When I was watching the which one bowl was that? The Sugar Bowl, I believe it was, between Alabama and Cincinnati. Sanders seemed to be one of the big names on the defense that kept coming up, and he seemed like a pretty balanced type defensive end. He knows how to stay home. They tried to run a reverse back his side, and he was there to make the tackle in the backfield. Generated some pressure. So, again, maybe a late day two guy, depending on how he tests. Zach covered Boye Mafe. Just a couple notes I took away from him. He seemed like a one-trick pony. It seemed to be that he always is rushing the outside shade of the tackle. And when there was a tight end, it just seemed like he got lost inside. Tight ends were blocking him pretty easily. That's not to say that's not something that can be fixed moving forward, but positively, he seemed to be generating the most pressure out of anyone on either team defensively. To Zach's point, he had the strip sack of Sam Howell. And again, to Zach's point, he did go for the sack and the strip, whereas some guys will look for the ball because they're very turnover generated. But Mafe has the speed off the edge to be a great pass rush specialist early on in his career. If he can get his run defense up, I think there's definitely a spot for him on one of these 32 teams in the next few years. My biggest concern, again, was just that he continuously rushes outside the tackle and he wins. But if you get stunted inside with some of these pro teams, if you're getting taken out of plays, you're going to lose your spot. The fact that he plays that 6-7 technique and even a 9 off the edge, he has the speed to do it, but I don't know that that's going to hold up in the pros. Moving up to the next level, linebackers, Darian Beavers, another Cincinnati defender. Big, strong type guy, probably a little bit bigger than your typical inside backer, but he looked instinctive. He looked like he was able to fight off the blocks of O-linemen. He looks like a guy that maybe needs a little bit more help in pass coverage, but definitely seems like maybe he finds himself in, at the very least, a special teams role in year one. Another guy that I think could find himself special teams was Georgia linebacker Channing Tindall. He really didn't catch my eye at all defensively. But there was a play on one of the punts where, I mean, Tyndall's not the fastest guy, but the effort is there. He got lost in the middle of the pack, and as the returner is running down the sideline, he took the right angle and he tackled him out of bounds. It's that type of effort and knowledge of your pursuit angles that are going to find you getting your playing time on special teams. Now, I've watched a lot of Tyndall being a Georgia fan. I think that he can carve himself a role as a linebacker. I don't want to get too far into that, but definitely a guy that I think is going to be day two based on his effort and ability to probably play every special team along with linebacker. Just two more guys. Damon Clark, very early on, had a play where, so for anyone who doesn't know, the Senior Bowl, you can't blitz. Clark was sitting back in coverage on the running back, but he saw the defensive end get the pressure, and he knew to come up and help with the tackle in the backfield. That's the type of awareness you need from your inside backers, to be able to see the field, to know when to leave your coverage and go help in the backfield. And then finally, Kobe Bryant. Obviously, this guy's name gets lost when you look at the Cincinnati defense because of the guy that plays on the other side of him, and Sauce Gardner. But from what I had heard, Kobe Bryant was probably the team MVP during the practice week for his team. I was kind of confused because it just seemed like the quarterbacks kept picking on him, and there were some catches made on him, hitches, corners. But he seemed real physical off the ball, and he always seemed draped on the receiver. So, I mean, you win some, you lose some. If you're always on your receiver, there's a chance you make a play on the ball, or there's a chance that the throw is just really good. Unfortunately for him, the catches were made on him, but it showed that his coverage skills are something that can be translated real nicely over to the NFL. Defensively, that's really all I had. I'm going to kick it back to Zach, and we'll start our offensive breakdown.
Thanks, Jack. It's going to begin this with Malik Willis, the talk of the town. He was the big winner from the practice, at least on the offensive side, and the quarterback specifically. He threw well in the rain, whereas others struggled, and he started the game. The couple notes I have on him, I saw that he slid to avoid a hit, which is huge for a young quarterback. I know the Senior Bowl is not the hardest hitting event in the world, but you still see guys, quarterbacks take hits that they shouldn't, and Willis did not. He throws a fastball, and he probably needs to learn a little bit of touch, or at least accuracy with touch, but he has the arm strength. That was pretty clear. He threw the ball away maybe a little too much. I saw multiple times where you could have argued he could have forced the ball down the field. However, throwing the ball away too much versus forcing too many throws, I think one is clearly better. And it at least shows that he's willing to play safe as a young guy from a small school. That's huge. I mean, to me, that's one of the biggest adjustments is these guys that make these throws at the small schools. And we'll talk about someone later on that did these things with the small schools, and instead of throwing the ball away, he made a few really bad throws. And when you get to the big stage, it's whether or not you realize that these throws are not as easy as they are at your university or your college. And for Willis, it seemed like he maybe even thought it too much, that there were some plays he could have tossed, and instead he thought, live another play, which if it is an intelligent decision, is great, at least if I'm evaluating. However, while he throws the fastball, while he seems to make decent decisions, most of his passes, at least in the game, seems wobbly to me. It's not a huge deal, but when guys, don't throw tight spirals, you have to worry about balls floating despite all the arm strength in the world. And maybe it was just a game time thing. Maybe he'll go to the combine, maybe he'll throw perfect spirals the whole time and it won't be an issue. When he scrambles, at least in my opinion, he kept his eyes downfield until the last possible second. And again, when you're looking at a young athletic guy who has as many rushing yards as Malik Willis has, the fact that he wasn't putting his head down and just running and juking out everyone as an automatic instinct almost is a huge bonus. And it was something I was personally really interested to see, but he wanted to pass the whole time, and that you can't really teach that. We have examples in the NFL of other guys and who, the rush comes and they just put their head down, or they just don't look enough. And it results, it changes a 5-yard play if you put your head down to maybe you get a 30-yard catch if you wait long enough and you're able to keep looking. The one really ugly play I saw was towards the end of the first quarter. He threw a deep ball as time expired because they were going to change possession, I believe. And while it was more of a throw him up type of play, he threw it off his back foot, and it was just not a good looking play. It wasn't a good throw. And even if you're saying it's just one last play, you got to get in, you would like to see him step into a deep ball and hit someone in stride, or at least not have it float up off your back foot, as an example of a play that may have happened and worked at Liberty. The last things I have on Willis are involving his interview. He had a really good interview. It was very casual. When asked about how he felt about being a top quarterback, he deflected it in a way and just talked about how great it was to be there and work with all the guys. Seemed like a really good team player, and in that way, a leader. And the biggest takeaway from his interview is that he's an avid chess player. And this may seem like a meaningless information, but chess in many ways is football. It's strategy, it's coordination, it's planning ahead, it's everything. If he's a good chess player, it's just one of those little things that might make a huge difference in how well he picks up the game from going to Liberty to the NFL, how well he picks up a playbook, and how well he digests an open field. And it definitely left this thinking Malik Willis, for me, while I was already decently high on him, when his athletic profile is trending up in all the right ways. Jack, do you have more notes on him?
Kind of building off what you said, based on his athletic profile, I definitely, especially coming into this game, thought that Willis had the most upside of the quarterbacks. Um, Personally, I didn't feel like Willis threw the ball enough for me to be coming out here and judging his throwing motion or anything like that. I do think that the thing he did prove that he does a lot of things well. Again, his athletic profile, he's quick, he's elusive. I thought his pocket presence and his movement in the pocket were really nice. I think that um, that's going to be a huge thing that translates into the league with guys that come after you like Donald and TJ Watt and all those types of guys. Being able to move around the pocket and understand where you are and where the pressure is such a huge thing. Kind of building off what Zach said, the arm strength is definitely there. I don't think that's a question. I think the problem there is that, to Zach's point, there's not enough touch there. And when you try to throw just bullets all the time, I noticed that he, from the throws that I did see, he lost the ball a little bit. And this isn't like my own thought. It was kind of built off of what Daniel Jeremiah and the guys in the booth were saying, was he seems to throw like flat, like he's not anticipating the ball dropping when the throw gets there, and it's causing guys to have to drop to the ground to try to catch passes that he's throwing. Again, building off Zach here, the interview, I thought he was very humble in what he was saying. Again, I don't know, due to the fact that that was a very like kind of casual conversation interview, how is he going to handle if the team loses? Like, how is he going to handle himself talking in interviews in that type of situation? But something that Zach said that I didn't really notice is that he was asked about being the top quarterback. I must have missed that part. But the fact that he deflected it is probably a good sign that coaches are going to look for when he interviews, just so that they know that it's not necessarily about him. It's about the team, and he wants to be the best for his team. Because I know he was talking a lot about hard work and putting the time in to make sure he's improving. And just final thought about the chess thing is, to Zach's point, it is about thinking ahead. And when you're a quarterback and when you're an offense, you need to think about that. There's plays and routes that are built for giving certain looks, sluggos, slant, which is a slant and go, hitch and goes. You need to make sure that you're thinking about thinking ahead. How am I going to set this up? If we start throwing hitches early, what am I going to do later on that when I threw that route to get the corner to jump that route? But that's about what I got on Willis. Kind of pushing our way ahead here to the next quarterback with Sam Howell. Of the 6 quarterbacks that played today, although Willis had the most upside, I thought that Howell was the most ready guy. Like, if he got thrown into the league today, how would he have fared? And I really don't think it was that bad. Or it wouldn't be that bad. Howell was a guy that, after I watched I think it was the Virginia Tech opener, I was like, he took a huge step back from last year. And I didn't know what the class of quarterbacks was going to look like, especially with Rattler, who, again, stayed in college, but having such a big downfall. Like, it really didn't seem like this was the year for these guys. And I thought that Howell might stay in school to try to increase his stock again. But going to the Senior Bowl and putting on the performance that he did, I was really impressed. Did not know he ran for 800 yards. So I definitely thought mobility was an issue of his. I was proven wrong. He's a big, strong quarterback with a fairly quick release. I like the way he moved around the pocket. He really didn't scramble out unless it was necessary. Like, it seemed like he was comfortable standing in the pocket as long as possible with his eyes downfield. My biggest issue with him was that he had 2 fumbles. We talked about the one earlier from Mafe. And again, when someone comes off the edge like that, it's just about being able to step up and realize that he's there. But that's always something that can be worked on. I thought there was a lot of good there. And Zach, what do you got about Howell?
So I also felt like Howell was the best quarterback there. I had him as my big winner of the day. He again seemed decent at moving within the pocket to avoid the rush. I know there was one specific play where there was a guy untouched in that came in and he shook him loose and rolled out to the left and re-squared his shoulders and threw and completed it. And that, when you roll to your non-throwing side, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And the fact that he actually reset and threw is just one of those little things you notice that is going to pay off in the NFL. I thought he made his progressions decently well when looking throughout the field. However, I noticed something, and it almost seemed like a tick, where every progression he would hit his non-throwing hand onto the ball. It was like the weirdest little thing, and I don't know if other quarterbacks in the NFL do this, and I've just never noticed it, but it was something that I guess could be a tell if the defense notices it, but I also don't see that as a big deal, and that's probably easily changed. I thought he had a really good arm. I thought he threw a really tight spiral on almost all of his throws. His motion was maybe a little long, but you're right, it was very quick, and he had very good mobility. And while my one little knack, I thought, besides the fumbles, obviously, which may be just a ball positioning issue that can be changed, I thought at times when he committed to scrambling, say he got pushed out of the pocket, I thought he just kept his head down at times. Instead of rolling out and looking downfield, I thought he scrambled. Now, granted, it never ended in negative yards, so that's a nitpicky thing. But when he scrambled within the pocket, he kept his head up. And then when he got pushed out, it seemed like he was just committed to the run. That's, again, it all was positive yards. I don't think he got taken in the backfield when he did that, taken down. So it might be just a nitpick. I still thought he was the best quarterback of the day. And I just want to throw out a disclaimer. Howell was one of the quarterbacks we got to see the most of. There was a few quarterbacks in this game, like Pickett, and I know Ritter went back in from what you were telling me, and I missed that. They still didn't throw as much. They weren't on the field as much. But with what we saw, we both agreed that Howell was the best looking, and I agree the best if you had to play him now quarterback. And speaking of Ritter, I'm going to move on to him. I missed most of his second half play because I honestly thought that they were just going to roll with Carson Strong, and that was that. And I wasn't overly impressed with him, but we'll get to that later. He had a really smooth motion, I thought. He had good, not great athleticism, enough to survive in today's NFL, which I feel like is the standard anymore. I mean, I feel like the pure pocket passers, there's not that many. But he had good throws. I thought he was really fluid. When he moved around the pocket, when he scrambled, it just all looked natural. Not, it was all one speed in a good way. So I thought it looked like early on, at least, they did a lot of, all this passes, or most of them came off of deep play actions. Now, I don't know, without looking at film, if that's just something he does a lot. Jack may have a better answer for this. But the passes were completed. I mean, he threw his touchdown on a flat, which isn't the hardest throw in the world, but it's also not a drop in the bucket, especially with a player you've never played before. And he certainly, let me put it this way, in my opinion, he didn't hurt himself. So it's definitely a positive performance. I just personally didn't see nearly enough to make a serious judgment, unlike Hal and Malik Willis and players like that. Jack, I know you're a Ritter fan, so you probably have more on him than I do.
So, yeah, to Zach's point, kind of coming into the offseason, I thought that Ritter was probably the best overall quarterback with a mix of his athleticism and ability to throw. I thought he topped out Willis just because he was able to throw the ball a little bit better. I heard this week he had a pretty rough week, and it kind of builds off what everyone saw against Alabama is, does he really have what it takes? Even I began to question that when I watched the Alabama game. I mean, he was under duress the whole game, but there's games. I mean, look at Joe Burrow. He's under duress, getting sacked 9 times a game sometimes. So it's going to happen, especially depending upon your situation. But in the game, his first couple of drives, um, I didn't think he looked all that great. To Zach's point, he did go back in. I saw him go back in after a couple Carson Strong drives in the fourth quarter. And he shows why he was able to run or produce the offense that he did at Cincinnati. He's athletic and mobile to an extent. I thought he had pretty good pocket awareness and movement. And when he had to leave the pocket, I thought it was the opposite of Howell, where he wanted to try to keep his eyes downfield. Like, he doesn't want to run, but he has the ability to, if he has to. The other thing I like that is he's not afraid to throw with the pressure in his face. He had D linemen and even not backers. I think he had a defensive back in his face at one point, but he wasn't afraid to throw it. He's willing to take the shot if it means getting the completion. That's really all I got on Ritter right now. Again, this is just based on the game. We'll come back with more of that later. Moving down the line again, Kenny Pickett. I was pretty disappointed by Pickett's performance. I don't really think he had that great of a day. I really felt like he wasn't moving around the pocket all that much. He seemed to be aware of where the pressure was at points, but then at other points he looked kind of clueless. Pickett, I thought, was actually more coming into this game more mobile than Sam Howell, and Pickett really didn't. For a guy that created the fake slide and looked like he just burnt the whole Wake Forest defense, he really didn't look all that fast or all that mobile. They were saying that he's good at throwing on the run. Maybe that's something we'll see more on film. But really wasn't all that impressed for a guy who's considered to be one of the top three, arguably the top one by some quarterback. The only other note I had on Pickett was that he was the only other person interviewed on the sideline. And I got a good vibe from Malik Willis. I didn't get that from Pickett. I think that Pickett's interview was fluent. I think he knew how to speak to the media or whoever was interviewing him. Obviously, that's not a huge media event. But he seemed kind of like a know-it-all. Like, he not necessarily cocky, but like he wasn't humble either. It was just like, I can do this and I can do that, and yeah, I know that, and all that type of stuff. Like, to me, like, this isn't a real player, but like I told Zach, like Bo Callahan from draft day, just kind of like how his attitude is. That's kind of the feel I got from that. And not saying he'll walk out of the draft room or the green room when draft day is there if he falls, but he certainly seems like the type of guy who's going to get frustrated if he's not picked where he believes he should be picked. Let's see. But in terms of like actual comparisons, I think that Josh Rosen probably fits him the best, not in terms of how he plays, but his attitude and kind of thinking he's this great guy. I mean, Josh Rosen is known for his interview telling people that there were 10 mistakes picked ahead of him, and now he's barely in a backup role. So, I mean, only time will tell, but today he was really not impressive. Zach, what do you got?
So, I think the first reaction to what you're saying is people are going to be like, well, he went 6 for 6 with 89 yards and a touchdown. And it's like, well, if you watch the game, his one really good throw in air quotes, where it was I think a 30-yard completion, I forget exactly how far it was actually a bad throw, in my opinion. It had hesitation, he double clutched, and it was just a really good catch by Christian Watson. Whereas if he would have thrown it right away and hit in stride, I don't know that it would have been a touchdown, but it would have been much, much better and looked better. And his touchdown was a little dump off to the running back who took it 18, 20, 25 yards to the house. So, 6 for 6 for 89 yards is a little misleading. I thought his release looked slightly hitchy, but to be honest, he only threw it 6 times, so I'd need to watch more film before I would even, like Jack said, comment on throwing motions or anything like that. He throws, one little weird note, he throws with gloves on, like Teddy Bridgewater, and I don't know if that's good or bad. It's, I don't know. With his questions about his hand size and stuff, not that I'm the biggest believer in that, but the fact that he uses gloves, it's just a weird thing. I don't know. Something maybe it shows up on tape that he needs the glove, and I don't know. Just for me, it's so uncommon to just do it in all weather. I mean, they were not in, cold. It was like 50 degrees, I think. So just a small thing that stuck out to me. The interview Jack covered completely well. I also got Rosen vibes. It wasn't like with a certain swagger like Burrow would have. It was much more Rosen know-it-all-y in a way, and I also think if he were to fall to the back end of the first, it would not be good. He wouldn't react. He wouldn't be humbled. He wouldn't be, I'll just play good wherever I go. It just feels like he maybe it was just that one interview, but it was not Malik Willis and Pickett's interviews were two different experiences. From Pickett, we're going to go to Carson Strong. These will be the last two quarterbacks, obviously, and we saved the worst two for last. Carson Strong threw an interception, and it was horribly underthrown. I mean, Jack was talking to me before. He could have done so many things different in that he could have gone somewhere else. He could have thrown it in stride, and instead he threw it. I mean, it was probably a touchdown if he threw it correctly, and instead, I mean, the wide receiver didn't even have a chance. That's how badly it was underthrown. Just to me, he didn't look good. They mentioned a knee injury lingering from high school. I also read after that it's not an issue anymore, but just a small thing to keep an eye on. I didn't watch a ton of them. I watched the beginning, and he was on another level down from the rest of the quarterbacks. And there was nothing that stood out to me personally. Now, maybe he has much better tape. Maybe he comes back to the combine and does well. But for me, he is one of two players that really hurt his draft stock. And Jack, I think you have similar feelings on this if you'd like to take over.
I definitely thought that Carson Strong was the worst of the six quarterbacks. I think that there's debate between whether Zappi or Strong was worse. I thought personally that Strong was the worst of the six. I thought that his arm strength was a real question. It seemed like most of his passes were floaters. I mean, unlike Willis where he's trying to throw bullets, it seemed like Carson Strong thought everything was a fade. It seemed like his only power was when he stepped up in the pocket. And I mean, I'm not saying that you can't, but to step up in the pocket every play and still have rough throw power is not a good sign. You need to be able to throw from where you are in the pocket because, I mean, I'm not saying he had the best protection, but not every offensive line in the league is going to provide you with the ability to step up. You got to throw from where you are. Late in some of his drives, I thought that he panicked a little bit too much, and instead of trying to get outside and just get rid of it or whatever, he just panicked and he looked really, really bad when that happened. To Zach's point, he did throw a really, really bad pick. I actually have a diagram drawn up for that. I didn't draw out the entirety of the play. I just kind of drew out what I thought was important. They were on their own 30-yard line, and the receiver outright was actually his receiver from Nevada, Dubes. He's on the line, and they're playing cover one. The corner is playing 7 yards off about the 37, 38-yard line. And at the snap, Dubes comes up to the corner who didn't move. He head fakes inside and is able to get outside and create separation. He's running down the numbers. This safety off the snap, he kind of like hovers inside between the hashes, and he's actually pretty late getting his read on this fade. He ends up somewhere near the 40 when the play ends, and it looked like he was expecting Strong to lead him. It looked like this safety was going to end up somewhere around between the 25 and the 30-yard line to try to break the pass up. And Carson Strong, even though Dubes had a step or two of separation on his man, steps up in the pocket, and throws off his back foot. He didn't follow through, and it was a really, really bad floater. I mean, it gave not only the safety who in the NFL would have gotten beat on that route, it gave the corner time to catch up and then turn and pick off the ball. It was just really, really unfortunate, really ugly. And then the last quarterback as we move forward was Bailey Zappi out of Western Kentucky. For a guy that went out and set NCAA records and beat everything that people said Burrow's records will last for a long time, he went out and beat them. And I know me and Zach share the same thoughts on this. Is how he did not look good at all. Like, it looks like they pulled this dude off the street and was like, here, play quarterback in the Senior Bowl. His pocket awareness was like non-existent. There was minimal movement. Like, if there was pressure on him in the pocket, there was a sack. Like, there was no movement. There was no like, oh, hey, maybe I should step up and avoid this. The awareness was, I mean, he really doesn't look like a college quarterback. And I'm not trying to be mean to the kid, but he looked lost. I know he came from a smaller, I think it was Houston Baptist or something, but like, you went out and proved yourself against D1 talent at Western Kentucky. Where was that? I know that you don't have your receivers and everything, but where were you today? Based on his ability or inability to move around the pocket, my guess is that his Western Kentucky line was really good and he didn't have to move around that much. That would be my guess. Again, without looking at film, it's hard to say. But my biggest knock on him was it seemed like he lacked arm strength, and he was not good going through his reads. I missed out on some of Zappi's plays due to my TV not recording the entirety of the Senior Bowl. So I'm going to kick it to Zach to just cover the rest of Zappi.
I had Zappi as the biggest loser of the day, in my opinion, even more than Carson Strong, because Zappi, as you said, was this guy that broke all these records, and he was almost a mystery. Like, at least from what I could tell, you know, he came from a really small school, but he had all of this stuff. And even when he played the top team that he played in the year in Michigan State, he had a really good game. So maybe the tape again shows other stuff, but as far as the game is concerned, I don't get it. I didn't see anything that led me to believe that he had the production that he had. I mean, before the game, they were talking about how good, you know, how he relies on a lot of touch and ball placement, and that he doesn't have the best arm strength, but it's not horrible. And yet I saw nothing. I saw none of that. I saw not good placement on his throws, horribly underthrown deep balls multiple times. I mean, with the game on the line and them running the 2-minute drill, he rolled out to his left after the receiver beat him right off the line, his opponent right off the line, and he could have had a touchdown, and then reset and threw to them, but it was underthrown by 15 yards, and he's lucky that it wasn't picked up. But then, on I believe it was the very next play, with time, I don't know if the time was expiring or it was under 30 seconds or something, I think it was like 29 seconds, he threw a ball that could have been a touchdown. The receiver beat him again, and he underthrew it again by 10 or 15 yards. And if he would have just let him, that would have been a touchdown. And it's a small little insight into what you could face in the NFL, and I just didn't see it at all. You know, I don't mean to bag on him, and obviously no one can take away his records. And again, maybe his film shows that if he has more time to study, that he has better placement and, you know, better anticipation. But I mean, we're not talking about a lightly underthrown ball. We're talking about extremely. So much so that I don't even know that I would be drafting him as a primary backup. But that might be too early of a take. We'll see. Although I don't know what I expect to see. It'll change his arm strength, and especially, you know, the combine is something I'll be looking for when they throw the go routes. How will he do there? I assume he's got an invitation. That concludes the quarterbacks, though. And we are now going to look at the running backs. I only have a few notes. I thought that in general, besides the quarterbacks, it was not the best look at most of the players. There just wasn't a ton of throws. There was one or two running backs that really got a majority of the carries. But with that being said, the first running back I saw, I believe, was Brian Robinson. Obviously, Alabama. He had a really good playoff run. Yet when I saw him in the game, he looked super, super stiff. And I know he's not an elusive back. Obviously, he's a power back. But, comparisons, not that I've seen this outright, but, an Alabama running back that's not a clear-cut first-rounder, but is a power back that, to me, everybody's going to start saying Derrick Henry. And obviously, there's only one Derrick Henry. But you still wonder, is he so good as being a power back that he will have a role in the NFL? And you still need a little bit of elusiveness. It just looked like he barely could turn upfield out of the shotgun on an outside zone. I know it's meant to go outside, but you have to be able to cut inside. Again, he got so few carries, I can't say for sure. And there's a lot of tape because obviously as an Alabama running back, but it just left me wondering, is he more of like Elijah Holyfield and Derrick Henry, where he's going to go into the combine, he's going to test really poorly, and he's just going to tumble. And time, again, will tell. And then the big running back game for me, and I think everyone, was Abram Smith from Baylor. He, from what I understand, is a power back, yet on his touchdown catch, he got into high gear in a hurry, and he outran almost everyone on the field, which is obviously a huge plus for a guy that's predicated on power. And with the catch, I know he had another drop, but it shows that he has decent hands, and maybe that was just a one-time thing. But he seemed to have a really good handle on what he was doing. And obviously he got tied for the leading carries, I think, with 11. So he got the most work and the most eyes on him. But certainly he's trending up leading this. And then the last person I had was Pledger from Utah. Just a quick little note. He seemed to have a nice blend of speed and power. He had a good yards per carry. He didn't get a ton of work, but just something that, these guys that go into the combine and test really well for their size, he's one to look after. He might run surprisingly fast for another guy that I believe they said was a power back. And Jack, I know you have more on Pledger than I do, and you have a few other notes on the running back, so it's all yours.
Starting with Brian Robinson, since he was the first one out, I think he was extremely disappointing. Now, I don't know how many running backs exactly were there, but I have notes on 4. Where Zach compares Brian Robinson to like an Elijah Holyfield, I'll stay within the same college. Is Brian Robinson going to figure it out and become a Derrick Henry-ish type power back, or is he going to become Bo Scarborough, where he runs through teams in college, and when he gets to the pro, maybe due to injury, he has a good game or two, and then just kind of finds himself in the back of the room or in free agency or a practice squad. Or Zach mentioned this before we started this, was he looked stiff, and I thought that was the same knock on Scarborough a couple of years ago. Again, with the power back, you're not necessarily going to have all the elusiveness in the world, but you need to have something, and he just looked way too stiff to be a guy that gets taken even day 2. I mean, after today, I'd argue that he's a day 3 guy now. Moving along, Abram Smith, I agree with Zach. I don't know if I'd call him MVP necessarily, but in terms of the running backs, was definitely the best overall running back. For any of these guys, it's hard to tell what their ability is going to be in the pass game, just because there weren't all that many running back passes. But on the touchdown, Smith looked like he had soft hands. He looked quick. And to Zach's point, he ran past almost everyone on the field. In between the tackles, he's predicated on power and physicality. He's not easy to take down, and I don't think I saw him go down on the first hit at any point during that game. Definitely a guy that had his stock rise. Probably one of the best overall running backs in this class. I'm pretty sure I said it in the last podcast when we went over the other 2 bowl games, was this is not an extremely impressive running back class. There's no reason that Abram Smith can't work himself into being a top 3 or a top 5 back this year. Pledger, I thought he showed a lot of promise as a runner. hands seemed a little inconsistent. Again, I don't want to make any assumptions here without watching more tape. He's another guy that seemed like he was powerful between the tackles, but really, really good with the ball in his hands. Little bit of speed, maybe not as much as Smith, but unlike Robinson, definitely had the ability to be a little shifty. And the last back was Arizona State running back Rachaad White. Whereas I thought Abram Smith was the best overall running back, I thought that White was the best pure runner today. I thought that there was reliable power there. White is another guy predicated on physicality. He was another guy that seemed like he wasn't taken down on the first hit, and when Carson Strong, I think it was Carson Strong, on the goal line, was unable. No, it was Ritter. I was unable to take in the snap correctly. He picked it up off the ground and still scored a touchdown. I mean, that's a huge thing. If I was one of these NFL coaches, that would be a huge takeaway for me. The awareness to pick up that ball and the ability to go I guess where they were probably 5 yards away if you count where they're standing in the backfield, and just being able to fight your way through. And obviously it's not all him, it's the linemen and everyone else, but there's definitely a place for this guy in one of these running back rooms that need a power guy. And then real quick, just circling back to Abram Smith, one of the other notes I had that I forgot to mention was that Abram Smith started as a running back and then transitioned to linebacker. And then when, I can't remember his name now, but the Baylor coach this year came in, he wanted to be predicated on a power run game, and he was willing to try out anybody. And when he heard that Smith was a running back, he brought him back to the offensive side of the ball. So you know that he's going to be a physical guy if you play defense for a year. That's all I got on the running backs. I'm gonna kick it back to Zach for the start of the receivers.
So as we mentioned a few times, it wasn't the best passing game day, meaning it's hard to get a look at the receivers when there's not any crazy plays. I mean, there's a couple underthrown deep balls, but really you can't judge too much. That'll be more for the game tape. That'll be more for the combine. And the one thing I'll say before I go into my specific two that I want to mention is that no receiver separated themselves. There was no standout, and that might not be the receiver's fault. It just was one of those days. But Christian Watson was listed at 6'4", and he looked it from North Dakota State. He had the great catch on what I feel like was a really bad Kenny Pickett throw. He seemed to have decent release, and I think the game may have given him a slight jump, or at least get more eyes on him come combine time. Again, I don't have the full list of the combine invites in front of me. I'm assuming these guys got invites. And then the other name was Bo Melton. He had a rough start with the kick return or the punt return, where he got tackled at like the 5. But when he actually got on the field as a receiver, he got a few screen passes and quick throws, and it looked really slippery. One of those guys that could be a late day 2, but probably more day 3 pick, but that gets on the field in gadgety plays and gets snaps at all different positions all over the field. Maybe a poor man's Curtis Samuel. But I know, Jack, you said you had another player in the game with a similar role in mind of being a gadget player.
Yeah, building off what you said, where Bo Melton was slippery, I thought that Calvin Austin was a guy that could become a gadget. And to Zach's point, we were talking before this, Austin had a lot of hype by the announcers of this game. And again, it's not necessarily their fault. The quarterback play wasn't entirely great, and there wasn't entirely a great play calling in terms of the pass game. But they put Austin at returner, and he looked slippery. He looked like a guy that could do really well with the ball in his hands. They compared him to Jakeem Grant. Again, without film study, I can't really make a comment on that, but I think he's a guy that a team looking for a gadget player could look at. Austin, I believe, comes from Memphis, not 100% sure, but you look at guys like Pollard and Antonio Gibson who have come out in the last couple of years that became these hybrid gadget type players. I mean, they became primarily running backs, but I don't know if Austin has the size for that, but something to keep an eye on. Quick note on Jalen Tolbert. he was a guy that had a lot of hype after practices this week. And I thought that early on in the game, he looked like a really reliable target. I don't think he dropped one of his targets. Then he kind of just disappeared. Again, I don't think that's his fault. Romeo Dubes, who I talked about earlier when I was talking about Carson Strong, I mean, to create separation the way he did, I thought he had great route running. He was able to use his eyes, his hips, whatever, to trick the cornerbacks into thinking one thing over the other. And hopefully, if he can translate those skills into the NFL, he is a quarterback that'll actually hit him in stride and not try to throw him a jump ball. To Zach's point, Christian Watson was a guy maybe with a little more passing in the game has his stock rise, but I definitely think that there's eyes on. And for anyone who watched the game, Charles Davis and Daniel Jeremiah and the guys in the booth kept telling their guy on the sideline, like, tell him to get the ball to Watson, get the ball to Watson. I thought that he was very physical off the line. I don't think his release was great, but I think that the physicality will help him build that release moving forward. To Zach's point on the Kenny Pickett thing, he will go get the ball. He's willing to get the ball anywhere in his window. He does not have breakaway speed, though. If he does not beat you pretty badly off the line in press coverage, he might have trouble getting to a place of separation. Again, this is probably why he's a day 2, day 3 guy right now. The route running is definitely going to need to be worked on. But I thought that kind of building off the physicality, he was a great hand fighter. They were on, I think this was on Pickett's drive also. They were on the 2-yard line, and the corner came up to press him, and he knocked his hands down and walked pretty much right past the guy. I mean, Pickett missed him wide open in the end zone. But I think that his physicality off the line, his hand fighting, these are little things that some guys in the league don't do well. And it's stuff that can be built off of, especially if you're a day 2 or a day 3 guy. The last person that I have notes on is actually someone I talked about in our last podcast, Jaquez Ezzard. He played in the NFL PA Collegiate Bowl, and he was a guy I thought showed really, really great receiving skills there. He ended up being a late addition to the Senior Bowl rosters, and he didn't have necessarily a great receiving day. I don't think he caught more than the one pass I saw, but he showed things in this game that I didn't necessarily notice in the other game. So the drive with Howell before the 2-minute warning, or the 2-minute drill, I mean, he catches a 3-yard hitch and he turns it into an 8 or 9-yard play. And then the next play is really, I mean, I replayed this on my TV probably 20 times. It got me to the point where I started drawing it up because I had to talk about it on this podcast. This one I did draw the full play because it is actually kind of necessary. So they're in a 2-by-2 set. Howell's at quarterback. The D linemen are in 5 tech, 3 tech, 2I, and another 5. So basically what's going on here is Howell has the quick concept to his right. It's a quick out or even a flat. I couldn't really tell. And a quick slant. Not quite sure who these were, but not important. So when Howell snaps the ball, the 2 guys in the 5 tech come off the edge. This defensive tackle here actually attacked the outside shoulder of the right guard. And maybe it was part of the game plan, but this defensive tackle crashed here. So, I mean, I can't have moving pictures, unfortunately, but you can probably tell if this guy crashes here, he seals him here. He's coming off the edge. The B gap is wide open. Howell makes his read here. This wide receiver, unfortunately, got jammed at the line pretty hard, and it screwed up the like the fluency of the concept. This backside here is a quick slant in the slot. This is Ezard. And whoever was on the outside, this is a post. So your look here is to make sure this post has time to develop. So when Howell makes his reads over here, he comes over here. Ezard's running a slant at about where the left guard is. He realizes that, and this is, I think, the play after the sack. Mafe comes off the edge, once again, gets around the tackle, and it forces Howell to step up and start moving in this giant B gap that is now open because he's sealed and he's in the backfield. Ezard stops his route and he hits, and I don't know how many people are going to understand this, but like the motion you would hit on a whip route. He flips his hips and he starts to box out the corner that was playing off of him, that's now over here with him, continues to box out and run with Howell in case he wants to throw it. And the minute he realizes that Howell wants to run it, he flips his hips again and he blocks his man. That's a huge thing. It's stuff like that makes you become a reliable target and like the best friend of the quarterback. To be able to realize during your route to stop and roll and like in terms of Madden, like playmaker yourself to run with the quarterback is just like a huge thing. And then to show that you're willing to block. And it wasn't just like these blocks that the receivers like throw their shoulder. I mean, he got hands inside and took control. Ezard, like I said in the last podcast, I really do believe is a guy that could work his way from being potentially undrafted to even a late day 2, early day 3 guy. He didn't get many looks in the pass game, as I said, but there's plenty of really good things that he did to work off of. That wraps up what I got on the receivers, and I'm going to kick it back to Zach for tight ends.
So if anyone that watches the game knows, there wasn't too much to talk about with the tight ends, and just in general, again, with the passing game. My only 2 quick notes are McBride caught a touchdown and a flat, matching his season total, despite having 90 catches. And that was just shocking to me as the best tight end in college football since he won the award. And that's something I really am interested to see on film. Did he drop a lot of touchdowns? Did they just not target him? Could he not get open when it mattered? I mean, that 90 catches is an awful lot to only have 1 touchdown at the tight end position. So that was just more of a curiosity than anything. Isaiah Likely, who's debated as the top tight end in his class, among many other guys, it's not clear cut. He's known as a passing game weapon. But on Sam Howell's rushing touchdown, he had a massive block on. Unfortunately, I couldn't really tell the position, but he held a block, and it was the only guy on the side that Howell had to worry about, and Likely took care of it. And that's that little play that I think really pops on tape for tight ends that are primarily known as receivers and not as blockers. So it was just a small little thing that certainly helped this case, I think. And then I'm just going to, talk about a few final thoughts before we wrap up this episode of the Senior Bowl. One narrative that has been following this season early on is that this is not a good quarterback class. And I can't say that I disagree. After watching this, yes, Willis looked like potential. Howell looked good. That being said, there was no massive standout. There was no Justin Herbert at this Senior Bowl. And even if you want to go back a year prior, or a year prior, there was no Daniel Jones. And I know people are going to just smirk at that, but Jones had over 110 passing yards in this game and was taken at pick 7 because of his Senior Bowl performance. And he only threw it 11 times. I just looked up the stats, much like a few of the other quarterbacks. There was no, nobody went over 100 yards throwing, and it was just, this is a rough year. And I think despite some positives by a few of the quarterbacks, this kind of highlighted a little bit. I mean, the only one missing from the big group was Matt Corral, and maybe he is the most talented, but he has serious injury concerns with his ankles. So it would be a really rough year if I, as a franchise, had planned to draft my franchise quarterback, especially draft them high, because there's just not one. And maybe when we see tape, someone will separate themselves, or will rethink it, or I will rethink it. But it's just not the year to be taking a top 5 quarterback. It doesn't feel like, and maybe even, the worst quarterback class we've had in some time. And obviously, we'll know this after we watch more film, after we're drafting, after everything. But it just feels like a really off year for the quarterback class. And then because of this, we may see, this isn't related to the Senior Bowl, but we may see more trades than normal as teams look to get another team's backup quarterback to start for them. Certainly the Green Bay situation, Jordan Love is probably a hot trade target because he may be better than anyone in this draft class. And I know that's crazy, but that's just the way it is this year. And so you may see an unprecedented amount of quarterback movement in trades. Just something to look out for and something we will talk about going forward. That's about all I have. It was, again, great to be back into this season. This is my favorite time of the year. And while I love regular season and playoff football, this is when I really enjoy myself with football. And the love of the game for me is on during this time. And Jack, you want to finish us off?
Real quick, just kind of circle back to tight ends. To Zach's point, I thought the McBride thing, the fact that he had the same amount of touchdowns today as he did on the season, is kind of concerning. Again, something that needs to be investigated, which, again, we will go into that when we get to film study. I thought that he showed out as a really good blocker, though. Leaking out of the backfield on short passes, I thought he did a really, really nice job of that. And I mean, not that leaking out and sneaking out are different, but when he's blocking and then kind of like makes it look like he goes to the next level to leak out for another pass, like going the way of the play action, I thought that he did that really well. He held his block maybe a little bit long, but sometimes that's what you need to get the linebackers and the safeties to go drop somewhere else and leave the opening for you. Jake Ferguson, I think Zach told me before this, he was the leading receiver in this game. For a guy that comes from Wisconsin, I really didn't have to watch his blocking because I'm sure he's an incredible blocker. That's just kind of how Wisconsin does with their run game. And Cole Turner, I mean, really didn't get the ball much. One thing that I did notice, though, Carson Strong had a very nice situation being on the same team as one of his receivers and Cole Turner. There was a play either late third quarter or early fourth quarter where Strong was getting pressured from the outsides and he stepped up, and right before he got sandwiched by the two defensive tackles, he saw Turner about 5 yards downfield. I mean, he was covered by about 4 different defenders within the area, but he threw the ball knowing that Turner was going to come down with that catch. And I think that shows reliability. And if there's a quarterback in this league that can find a way to build a relationship with Turner like Carson Strong had, to trust him to do something like that with 4 people around him, I think he could turn out to be maybe not a huge receiving threat, but maybe a tight end too that sneaks out of the backfield and gets you a couple yards on third down or whatever it may be. That kind of wraps up what I have in terms of the players. In terms of closing thoughts, I just want to build off what Zach said. Is the narrative is that there's no clear-cut quarterback one in this class. And for a class that, and yeah, again, to Zach's point, people are going to smirk, but that had Burrow, Tua, and Herbert, I mean, these are probably day 2 guys in that draft class. We don't want to sit here and make assumptions, and like Zach said, there's probably a guy that might jump out at us when we start doing film study, as like guys like Pickett, who we weren't necessarily impressed with today. Personally, I didn't feel like that there was a first-round quarterback in this class, nonetheless a top 10 or a top 15 player. I think that, to Zach's point again, the guys like Jordan Love, who um, it's hard to compare these college guys who haven't played a pro game yet, but like Jordan Love, Mitch Trubisky, Gardner Minshew, Tyler Huntley. There's so many names that you could throw out right now. Trey Lance, that you're willing to roll with because you've seen what they can do within the league. So I think that there could be a lot of movement trading for backups, and maybe some of these guys become backups for a couple years and then find themselves in a role. Like even Howell, like I think he was the most ready to play, but I don't think he's ready to play. But those types of backups where you're like, wow, this is great, could go and compete for starting jobs that are open for these teams like the Lions who want to bring in competition or who want to replace their own guy or be ready for the future. Like the Falcons, I mean, with Matt Ryan pretty much ready to leave, people wonder where's the backup. This should have been something that should have been in the plans years ago because no one knows where or how long Ryan's going to stay here. And now you're sitting in a draft class with someone with the 8th pick, with no real answer for quarterback. And that's not to take a shot at any of these guys, but I don't think that was a great decision. I think if there is trades into the top 10 this year, it's going to be for the defensive players, the Thibodeaus, the Hutchinsons, Hamilton, Stingley, Sauce, which I think could make this draft a little bit interesting. Being a defensive guy, I really would like that for once. But that's really all I got. Looking towards the future here, I think Zach mentioned it early on. With all the open positions in the coaching carousel filled and the front office, we will have a podcast with that sometime probably midweek, breaking down their hires for their assistants, stuff like that. We are almost done with the website. We were hoping to have it today, but we added a couple extra things to make it look nicer. So that'll probably be within the next day or two. And Zach, am I missing anything?
Just that as soon as we get the website up, we're going to be starting to put out mainly free agency coverage first, as we do our video recap and film study on the prospects in the background. We will be covering predictions, all signings, trades, rumors, things of that nature. And no, just that I'm really excited to be in this again. Really excited to be in this season of football now.